So let's bring everybody up to date where we left off um, and what we finished with, which was, again, wow. We've had the 4th of July since then. And what else have we had? I don't know. Some other stuff. Um, a lot of crazy weather. But what we left with last time was that we read about, we finished with this little story, mini story about Rabbi Meir and his wife Bruria. Now, Bruria is a hard name to say, but Bruria is one of the most famous women in the Talmud. Interestingly, a lot of people talk about the Bible not having a lot of women characters in it. The women are sometimes not even named. Lot's wife, for example, or Noah's wife. But what's very interesting about the Talmud is there's even less women as far as characters go. Oftentimes the women are kind of like not really, sometimes they're not named. They're just a random, person that says something, or a Roman woman will say something, a matrona, as she's called. It's just it's an unnamed woman. And very rarely do we hear from the rabbis' wives. One of the few exceptions is Bruria, that is Rabbi Meir's wife. And so last week we read this interesting story that Rabbi Meir was dealing with some hooligans in his neighborhood, and he was going to pray for them to die. And Bruria said, "We don't do that. We don't pray for a person to die. We pray for the sin to be dead. We pray for the sin to be expunged." Bruria, as you can see right here, this is her Wikipedia page. She's quoted as a sage in the Talmud, right? She's the wife of the Tana, which is a Tana is a rabbi from the Mishnaic period. The rabbis in the Tanaitic period, or in the Mishnah, are referred to as Tanas. That's a rabbi. It's a rabbi of the Mishnah. But not only was her husband a rabbi, but her father, Hanina ben Teradion, was also a rabbi. And I don't expect everybody to necessarily remember what happens to Hanina ben Teradion, but it says right here, he's one of the 10 martyrs that we learn about. And Hanina ben Teradion is, well, this artistic picture, which is on the Knesset menorah. His story is that when he was burned by the Romans, he was burned in a Torah scroll. He was wrapped by the Romans in a Torah scroll and then set ablaze. And wet wool was placed on his chest to prolong his suffering. So, yeah, that was her dad. And according to the story, their daughter, Hanina's daughter, was put into a house of prostitution. So this was the punishments that Hanina ben Teradion dealt with. So that means Rabbi Meir's sister-in-law was put into a brothel. And there's also a story about how he rescued her out of the brothel. But yes, this is who Bruria was. So Bruria, interestingly, is a very well-respected sage in her own right. Here's a little picture of her as a teacher, as a student, or studying. And she was, again, according to the Talmud, very gifted, like gifted beyond belief. Yeah, and here it says, an unnamed sister was sold into sexual slavery. So, yeah. So she had a lot to be angry about, but she doesn't seem to be angry, and she doesn't seem to she doesn't let her anger at least get the best of her. Here's the story we just read: to pray for the wicked, rather to change themselves rather than to be dead, and that because we're going to read another story about her now. And here it says, several modern Jewish schools for women have been named after Bruria. So one of them is, it's now called the Lindenbaum Study Center in Talpiot in Jerusalem, which is now called the Lindenbaum Study Place, but it was originally called the Michelet Bruria. And then there's the Bruria High School for Girls, which is in New Jersey. And you can see that this is, a lot of people say that there's a lot of people who say that she was like the rabbis in her own right. Like she was at the level of her husband. So some people say she's kind of the example of a woman rabbi before they were called rabbis. So that's what we finished with, her one story about her kind of teaching her husband that we pray for people to change their behavior rather than to be killed. And now we're going to read another story, which tells us again what kind of person she was. So it says, a certain heretic, and again, it doesn't say what kind of heretic. It says a heretic, which could be a Christian, could be a Roman, could be somebody who's a Jew who follows certain kinds of philosophies that are considered not to be followed. But the heretic comes to her and says, quotes the line from Isaiah, "Sing, barren woman who has not given birth. Open forth in song and cry, you did not travail, for more are the children of the desolate than the children of the married wife, said the Lord." This line from Isaiah. So he says to her essentially, because you've never had children before, which according to this, she didn't have kids, she should sing and rejoice. And they're kind of making fun of her, but they're also making fun of the Bible. Like, why would the Bible say that women who don't have children should sing and rejoice? That seems weird. Now, again, the context of it to some extent from Isaiah is that the women who may have lost a child to some extent might be better off than they might not. I mean, the woman who never had a child might be better off than a woman who lost children. But it's a mean thing to say either to her, to people who follow the Bible, which this heretic might not have, or to both. So according to the tradition, she responds to the heretic's mockery and said, "Fool, go to the end of the verse where it is written, for the children of the desolate shall be more numerous than the children of the married wife, said the Lord." So the whole line from it actually says that those women will eventually have children. Are they actually their physical children, or are they the children of their community? Is there, again, a bigger lesson here beyond just, you didn't have kids, but now you'll have kids? But she basically says to the heretic, you're reading it out of context. You didn't read the whole verse. And she says, what is the meaning of sing, barren woman who has not given birth? It means sing, congregation of Israel, which is like a barren woman who did not give birth to children who are destined for Gehenna like you. And what she said is, the first part of it is really for somebody who would have given birth to a child like you, that it's better that they never had a child. So she basically says, you're going to hell, and it's better for them, for a parent never to have had you. So she turns it on him. And it's obviously not a very nice thing to say to some extent, but she's making fun of somebody who made fun of her. And, she's turned the tables on him. It shows her a certain level of mental acuity. She's very sharp. Just flipped it on him. Now, that's an example of a heretic coming to a rabbi. And again, they put Bruria at the same level as the rabbis, because the next story talks about another heretic who comes to a different rabbi. And it says a certain heretic said to Rabbi Abahu. So what's the corresponding situation? A heretic coming to a rabbi. So they basically put Brewery on the same level as Rabbi Abahu. And this heretic, again, is quoting the Bible, which shows that these heretics are either Jews who are familiar with the Bible, Jewish Christians who are familiar with the Bible, Christians who are familiar with the Bible, but somebody who knows the Bible well enough to get into these dialogues. Just so you know, the Christians did the same thing at the same time. At the exact same time that the rabbis of this period, of the Mishnaic period, are talking about heretics coming at us, there's a very famous church father named Justin Martyr. And Justin Martyr has a dialogue with a rabbi that in the Latin version of the name is Trypho. So it says it's Justin Martyr's dialogues with Trypho, which was basically putting the New Testament or the new religion of Christianity against the old religion of Judaism. And basically, Justin Martyr is making fun of Judaism through his dialogues with Trypho. Some people think that Trypho is actually Rabbi Tarfon, who's mentioned in our Mishnah and Talmud that we read about him. He's got very famous sayings, Rabbi Tarfon. He's the one who said, it's not your job to finish the task, but neither are you free from trying. But we don't know for a fact that it's the same rabbi or that Justin Martyr ever met him. But Justin did live in the land of Israel, and he could have had dialogues with Rabbi Tarfon. They live at the same time, so it's possible. And he was a well-known rabbi. So the fact that we have these other sides of these dialogues, again, we don't know that the heretics that they're talking about are Christian. I want to make it clear that we don't know that. Some people will make those claims that every time a heretic is mentioned, that they're really talking about Jewish Christians. I think it's clear actually from some of these lines that they are not Christian. So maybe some of them were, and they're still classified as heretics, but it may not be that, again, all of the heretics are all the same in their religions or philosophies. But this heretic comes at Rabbi Abahu and says, so again, this dialogue that we have between a rabbi and a heretic, a certain heretic said to Rabbi Abahu, it is written, a psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. And similarly, it is said, and that's from Psalm 3. We talked about this psalm before. The Talmud talked about this psalm too. The psalm that, according to tradition, David wrote while he was fleeing the revolt led by Absalom. And we talked about before, again, I showed you that they're interested in these psalms, especially the ones that take place during David's life, or they say they take place in David's life. To the chief musician, Al-Tashchet, a michtam of David when fleeing from Saul into the cave. Which event was first? Since the event with Saul was first, it would have been appropriate to write it first. And so what they're saying is, Psalm 3 talks about David and Absalom, but Psalm 57 talks about David and Saul. Well, the David and Saul psalm happened decades before. Why would that be the 57th psalm, and the David and Absalom psalm would be Psalm 3? Why wouldn't they be in order? Why has David put the psalms in an order that's not chronological? Wouldn't it have been appropriate to have it first? Rabbi Abahu said, so the heretic says to him, Psalms are out of order. And by the way, it shows you by this point that the Psalms weren't in order. I told you before, it wasn't Psalm 57. It wasn't Psalm 3. They didn't have numbers, but they did have an order. They were in a book. They were in a scroll. They were written down, and they were written down in an order. So they're already talking about the order of the Psalms. Again, it doesn't surprise us. We know that. The Psalms were in order by the Dead Sea Scroll period, which was maybe 150 years before. So we know they were in order, just didn't have a number in front of it. So Rabbi Abahu says to the heretic, for you who do not employ the homiletic method of juxtaposition of verses, it is difficult. It's kasha, right? It's hard. But for us, employ the homiletic method of juxtaposition of verses, it's not difficult. The sages commonly homiletically infer laws and moral lessons from the juxtaposition of two verses. So the rabbi said, you guys don't look at midrash. You don't look at the text teaching us things by where they are, and the text can have meanings that are not just obvious meanings based on where it comes from in the order of Psalms.
Down, I know
it's not there. Yeah.
But so they weren't called rabbis.
Well, yeah, I don't know why they. Yeah, I don't know why they use the word sages there. Yeah, there's no reason for it. It's just kind of saying maybe not just rabbis, but anybody who reads the Bible, even before they were called rabbis. Because I think, like, again, it doesn't say either one of those words there. It just says, it ends with the words lo kasha. It's hard for you. By the way, the only words that actually it says for you who don't drosh things out. The word right here is right here, darshitun. Right. You don't drosh, right? You don't drosh, so it's hard. For us, that the word in Aramaic is the drashinan. Those of us that do drosh, it's easy. It's not hard, right? Because we look at a lesson, and what is a and Aramaic? Well, this line's actually Aramaic, but yeah, it's all Aramaic. But because it's like, I'll just show you the way that you can kind of tell is the extra dalid. Well, not the extra dalid, but the dalid in Aramaic, a dalid before something is like a shin is before in Hebrew. Really? Yeah. So when we say she, it is the word that or those. She before a word. So we say like shechol or shebechol, right? That are all, or we say the word kol means all, or shalo, right here, this word. In Hebrew, that would be shalo. That doesn't shalo. In Hebrew, in Aramaic, it's delo. It's the same letter. I mean, it's the same. It's a different letter, right? But it's the same thing where we just add a letter before something. And so when you see the word, if you see a dalid before something, right away you know it's Aramaic. Also, the aleph at the end of words also give it away, like kashet at the end with the aleph, like I told you, like had gadya, or the alma, batra,
there's no question, there's no vowel there.
Correct. But again, when we look at I mean, I'll just show you since again, we're not going to learn Aramaic. No, we're not going to learn Aramaic in its totality, but we definitely want to show a little bit of stuff so that you can recognize it. And when I point it out that you're
a lot more juice
that you're going to see it. Here's I'll just show you, the Mourner's Kaddish. When you look at the Mourner's Kaddish, when you see the Alma instead of Ba'olam in Hebrew, and in Aramaic, the word Olam is Alma. And then here's D, or here Dechol, which in Hebrew would be Shekol. So Ba'agalah, Be'agol in Hebrew. So again, whenever you see that daled before something, then the kudsha, right? What?
Israel.
Yeah, Yisrael is the same. Yep. But if you see a daled before it, or so again, the aleph at the end of words give away it's Aramaic. You see all these alephs at the end of words. You can hear it in the Mourner's Kaddish.
Words.
Yeah, in Aramaic. So when we do this whole line, all the olives, and you hear it, of course, in the Kol Nidre prayer, Shirata, Tushbechata, V'nechemata, Be'alma. When you hear those phrases go by, you know you're doing Aramaic. And when you hear a word like Dechol or Da'amiran, Da'amiran, in Hebrew, that Dalet is taking the place of the Shin in Hebrew. Sheh Omer. In Aramaic, it's De'amiran. So it's giving it away. Now, again, the word drosh or darash or darshan, that's Hebrew, but dead darshan, that's when you see those two dollars together, you never see two dollars together in Hebrew. Every time you're going to see two dollars together, oh, that's Aramaic. So again, getting back to this is juxtaposition of verses. And what's the juxtaposition? Where are these juxtapositions? Regarding the juxtaposition of verses, Rabbi Yochanan said, from where in the Bible is it derived that one may draw homiletical inferences from juxtapositions? So before we even get into telling you what the juxtaposition of those Psalms is, because they're obviously going to tell us about Psalms near Psalm 3 and Psalms near 57. But before they even get to that, they're going to teach you a little bit about how we do this juxtaposition. And actually it says, the works of his hands in truth and justice, all his commandments are sure, adjoined forever and ever, made in truth and uprightness, which is from Psalms. So in Psalms, it uses the word right here. And again, you wouldn't necessarily know that they're talking about adjoined verses, but the line in Hebrew says the words semuchim, which they don't even, by the way, translate as adjoined or touching. They wrote the word, they translated as well-founded, but another way to translate the word semuchim is touching or next to, right? Joined forever and ever. Conclude from here that it is appropriate to draw inferences from the juxtaposition of God's commandments. Accordingly, David's fleeing from Absalom is situated where it is in order to juxtapose it to the next chapter, which mentions the war of Gog and Magog. The second chapter of Psalms opens, why are the nations in uproar? Why was the chapter of Absalom juxtaposed with the chapter of Gog and Magog? They are juxtaposed so that if a person should say to you, expressing doubt with regard to the prophecy of the war of Gog and Magog against the Lord and against his anointed, and again, the war of Gog and Magog, we also read about it, we talked about it in the book of Ezekiel, but when the Psalms talks about it in Psalm 2, then we get hit with Psalm 3, and it says in Psalm 3, is there a slave? No, in Psalm 2, it says, is there a slave who rebels against his master? Is there someone capable of rebelling against God? You say to that person, is there a son who rebels against his father and severs the relationship with the one who brought him into the world and raised him? Yet nevertheless, there was such a son, Absalom. So too, there can be a situation where people will seek to rebel against God. And so here they're saying that Psalm 2 talks about rebellion against God. And the rabbis are teaching, and that's why Psalm 3 is right after, to teach us about a son who rebelled against his father. And so what's the connection? Rebellion against somebody who you shouldn't be rebelling against. So they say, there's a psalm, and there's another psalm. So here's another beautiful thing from the Psalms. And like I said, this is really great for those of us who are Tuesdays reading Psalms. If you're not, maybe it'll inspire you to be there Tuesday or to watch back the Tuesday morning classes. Because the Psalms are amazing texts, which, again, the rabbis mine the Psalms for lessons that are not always like, you'd think, well, I guess you'd think to yourself, really, the song teaches us that? And they say, yes, we can learn from these songs. So Rabbi Yochanan said, in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, what is the meaning of that which is written? She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of loving kindness is on her tongue. That's a beautiful line from Proverbs, right? That's verse 26. It's a beautiful line from Proverbs. This isn't from Psalms, this is from Proverbs. It's from a section of Proverbs that we know as, somebody? Right here. Eshet Chayil means a woman of valor. A woman of valor. They didn't translate it as that. What a rare find as a capable wife, but it's Eshet Chayil. The text from Proverbs that a man is supposed to say to his wife every Shabbos. He's supposed to praise his wife as a woman of valor whose value is far above rubies. This is the line from Proverbs, which talks about how wonderful a woman is. Usually, again, what a husband should say to his wife, right? All the great things that she does. And one of the things that she does is her mouth is full of wisdom, her tongue with kindly teaching. So it tells us that women had an important role to play in the ancient world, and they were, again, supposed to be valued and treasured. So that's from Proverbs, not from Psalms, but hold on for a second. The sages explain that this chapter discusses the wisdom of Torah and those who engage in its study. So with reference to whom did Solomon say this verse, right? So it seems as though it's about women, but the rabbis say, well, maybe it's about Torah. And maybe specifically, he said this verse about none other than his father, David, who was the clearest example of one who opens his mouth in wisdom. Now, Eshet Chayil is clearly about a woman, but because it also could be about the Torah, they just derive from that Solomon, who according to tradition wrote the book of Proverbs, right? David wrote the book of Psalms, or much of the Psalms, and Proverbs, according to tradition, is written by Solomon. And Solomon, according to the rabbis, actually wrote Eshet Chayil about his father. That's what they just said. His father taught him Torah. So his father was the clearest example of one, and again, this is not in the text, but it's about his father. Now, the next part is now explaining why this is about David. And as we just said, David, according to tradition, wrote the Psalms. So now they're going to say the Torah of David, the part that Eshet Chayil, again, we assume it's about a woman. First of all, they're saying, no, it's really about the Torah. And really, Solomon was talking about his father teaching him Torah and teaching him from the Torah that he in particular wrote. And what was the Torah that he wrote? Psalms. And it says right here, David wrote and he opened his mouth to wisdom and so spoke and sung. He resided in 5 worlds or stages of life, and his soul said a song of praise corresponding to each of them. 5 times in the Psalms, there's a line that says, Baruchi nafshi, bless the Lord, my soul, each corresponding to a different stage of his life. Now, this phrase, Baruchi nafshi, does come up 5 times in the Psalms. And the rabbis derive from that it actually related to David saying that 5 stages of his life. At 5 stages of his life, he would have said that. And what are these 5 stages? This is very interesting. What are David's 5 stages? Because if they're David's 5 stages, maybe there are 5 stages, right? Let's take a look. He resided in his mother's womb. That was his first world. And he said a song of praise of the pregnancy. As it is stated, David, one of the Psalms, Psalm 103 said, Baruchi nafshi, in Psalm 103. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that it was within me. Bless his holy name. So in that, he thanks God for creating all that was within his mother, the womb that he's in. So there, the Baruchi nafshi is all that is within, right? Gravai, inside. So even though it's within me, He's actually saying within, over me, within the insides with me, inside this place with me. And that was in his mother's womb. That was his first world. Okay? He came out. He came out, right? He emerged into the atmosphere of the world, his second place, his second step, his second world. He looked upon the stars and the constellations, and he said a song of praise of God for the entirety of creation. As it is stated later on in the psalm, Baruchi nafshi, right? But it actually there says, Baruchu Adonai, bless the Lord, his angels, mighty in strength, and that fulfill his word, listening to the voice of his word. Bless the Lord, all his hosts. His servants that do his will. Bless the Lord, all his works, in all places of his kingship. Bless my Lord, my soul. And then it finishes again with us. Baruchi nafshi. Bless my soul. So David saw the grandeur of all creation and recognized that they are mere servants to God, right? Carrying out the will of their creator. So when David first kind of comes out into the world, he sees the stars. He recognizes that God created this amazing world. God, all those beautiful things in the world, in this world. I was in one world. Now I'm in the world and I see the world. This world that we're all a part of. It's the second world, second step. This is interesting. He nursed from his mother's breasts, his third world, and he looked upon her bosom and sang a song of praise, right? He sang this song. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and do not forget all his benefits. Gemulav, which is also from Psalm 103. The etymological association is between the word gemulav and gemule mechalav, which means weaned from milk. So in the book of Isaiah, it actually says the phrase gemule mechalav. And here they say, if you look at the word gemulav, it sounds like gemule mechalav. If you combine the two words together, it means wean from milk. The weaning of milk from milk was his third step, this third world, where he's nursing and he takes this in. So David understood even when he came out of the womb, and he also understands even when he's nursing in his first few years, he understands that God's world is amazing. And his second step is, third step, is now in his mother's outside of her body. Now, here's an interesting little tangent. And as I said, the Talmud oftentimes talks about stuff that the Bible doesn't talk about. And here's a weird one. Promise you. When we get to certain places in the Talmud, I'm going to tell you, this is weird. But I don't know that it's wrong. But here's a Talmudic answer that you might have wanted to know about human anatomy. we must understand, right? What is it meant by all his benefits? The word does say gemulav. If you're going to say that is the nursing milk that he was deriving benefit from, what in particular is praiseworthy in what God provided beyond merely providing for the infant, right? Rabbi Abahu said, in contrast with most other animals, God placed her breasts near her heart, the place that is the source of understanding. And so the rabbis just derived a very interesting lesson from human anatomy. Most animals have udders that are towards the rear of their bodies. It's a fact. Human beings, our mothers have, again, our mother's breasts are near their heart, the lev. And so the rabbis derive from that it comes from the place makom binah, the place of discernment, which is another name for the heart. It's a place of wisdom, it's a place of knowledge, but it's also a place of discernment. And so because human beings are nursed from the middle of the chest by the heart, we're closer to our mother's discernment, the source of discernment, which helps us be a little bit better than the animals, assumedly. It gives us a little head start. So again, I don't know what to tell you other than the Talmud just threw out a weird lesson from the human anatomy. Now, again, it's somewhat based on their reading of the Psalms, but it's also now, they just threw that out. It's kind of an interesting lesson, which is why do human beings nurse in a different spot? Because it's by our parents' heart. So that's a little bit of tangent, a little bit of a tangent. And the rest of it says, what is the reason why God did this? Rav Yehuda said, so that the nursing child would not look on the place of his mother's nakedness. Rav Matana said, so that the child would not nurse from a place of uncleanliness. So the rabbis went a little bit further, which is, okay, but so why not down there? That's why. So that is a lesson. I don't know if you ever thought you'd ever hear the reason of why the breasts are where they are. To keep us cleaner. Any questions? Good. Let's move on. No, only because it's actually a wonderful lesson. It's something that the rabbis derive as much from the Bible as they do from human anatomy. And they looked on that and said, yeah, there's a lesson from that. So where are the other places that David saw things and learned from them? Where were his other steps, his other worlds? And it says, he witnessed in both vision and reality the downfall of the wicked. And he said a song of praise. It is written, let sinners cease from the earth and let the wicked be no more. Bless the Lord, O my soul. Hallelujah. That's from Psalm 104. The next Psalm. So here they're really kind of going in order. The first steps of Barchi Nafshi is from Psalm 103. And then we see it again in Psalm 104, right? So it's interesting that, again, we're reading from, we're reading from that, that same section, right? We're reading from Psalm 103 and 104. But folks, this is why the Talmud is so amazing. What did they also just do? What did they also just drop on us? Well, for those people who were not here last time, didn't we just read this? This is the line that Bruria had quoted back to her husband. Don't pray for them to die. Pray for the sin to die. Let wicked be no more. Right? Barchi nafshi. It finishes with that. So the rabbis just were able to go back to the line from Psalm 104 that we just read, which is what we finished with last time. It's not that we want sinners to die. We want sin to die. We don't want wicked.
No, it zips.
What?
It like zips.
Yeah, I know, but not very well.
So that is the fourth world, the world of looking around the world and seeing goodness and badness. Badness, wickedness.
Oh, wait a minute.
And the fifth world was when David looked upon the day of his death and sang, right? He sang a song of praise, as it is stated, bless the Lord, O my soul, Lord my God, you are very great, you are clothed in glory and majesty. And so what did God...
It tastes better. It tastes really good with that dressing.
Guys, I gotta... Hold on a second. What we learn from this is that they also or quoting here, the fact that David, even when he died, was not giving up on looking at the world and seeing how beautiful it was, right? He sees God as he's dying and says, or sees the fact that when he dies, he's not dead yet, but he wrote the psalm envisioning his death, looked upon the day of his death, and still, as he's contemplating his own mortality, he hasn't died yet, but he's envisioning when he dies, that when he sees God when he dies, he's going to say, "Bless the Lord, my soul. Lord, my God, you are very great. You are clothed in glory and majesty." So if he can praise God even as he's dying, then think about how wonderful David's Torah was. The Torah that he taught his son Solomon. And of course, the Torah that David's teaching us, which is even in death. And when does he look on God? He looks at God when he's dead. He doesn't look on God in life. He sees God at the end of his life when he's done, when he's passed. And even in death, he's going to look at God and he's going to say, "Thank you, God. Bless me. Bless my soul. Bless my soul. Barchi nafshi, my nefesh." This is a very, very powerful lesson. The connection between the final praise and the day of his death is unclear. Well, they're going to explain why. From where is it inferred that this death was stated with regard to the day of death? Rabbi Bar Rav Shela says, we can derive this from the verse at the end of the matter where it is written, "You hide your face, they vanish. You gather your breath, they perish and return to the dust." Which is, again, it's not going to be there, but in Psalms it says that God, when we don't see God, when we go through our lives and don't see God, just understand you will see God when you die, right? When people see God, it's because they're in heaven. So it totally makes sense. But now they're going to get into this very interesting discussion about the soul. And here we go. So is this still in the Ein Yaakov, this part, Jesse? I think it is. Okay, we're just making sure.
That part.
It basically is here. Bless the Lord, my soul, and all that was within me. Bless his holy name, right? This is the line, again, what do we come to? Rav Shimi bar Ukva said to Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, "Come and see that the attribute of the Holy One, blessed be he, is not like the attribute of flesh and blood, as this verse praises the formation of man in his mother's womb. The attribute of flesh and blood is that he shapes a form on the wall for you to see, and yet he cannot instill it within a spirit and soul, bowels and intestines. While the Holy One, blessed be he, is not so. God shapes one form within another form, a child in its mother's womb, and instills it with spirit and soul and bowels and intestines." And so this part's not in there, right? And this is the explanation of what Hannah said with regard to the birth of Samuel. "There is none holy like the Lord, for there is none like you, and there is no rock like our God." Well, when Hannah can't have a baby, she says, "God, you're amazing. Nothing else can do what you do, because you make a life come out of another life," right? We can't do that. By the way, it tells us, we can't do what God does, which is interesting because there is like a question of whether we'll ever be able to do this, whether we'll ever be able to essentially create human life without ever passing through a womb. And we might be able to. And actually, to some extent, the rabbis are almost saying, if we could do that, we can't do what God does, which is make that happen We can't make that happen. We can't create gestation. Even if we could create life, we couldn't create gestation. Which to some extent, I don't want to get too far afield, but the rabbis believe that it is possible for people to do that. Create a human being. They called it a golem. And you've all heard of the word the golem before, because it's like the first version to some extent of a Frankenstein. And some people say Mary Shelley based Frankenstein on a golem. But the rabbis basically put forward that maybe, again, and they said maybe even there were rabbis who made a golem, but a golem doesn't exist, doesn't come out of another being. It was literally like brought to life outside of the body. But to bring something out of life inside another body, only God can do that. Now, again, that's what the rabbis imagined was the difference between human beings and God. And if human beings could do it, can never bring forth through that. And what is the meaning of there's no rock? When Hannah said there's no tsur, she's really saying there's no tsa'ar, which is artist. There's no artist like God. Human beings can build things, but not God, not like what God does. And so rather than say rock, which is tsur, she translates it, or she said the word tsur actually, read it as tsayar, which is an artist. There's no artist like God. So, and we'll read this section too. What is the meaning that there is none like you? Rabbi Yehuda ben Manasseh said, do not read the verse, there is none like you, bilcha. Rather read it as none can outlast you, which would be, again, levolakha, as the attribute of the Holy One, blessed be he, is not like the attribute of flesh and blood. The attribute of flesh and blood is such that his creations outlast him, but the Holy One, blessed be he, outlasts his creations. So a human being if a human being makes well, I'll give you an example. Michelangelo, created a beautiful statue of David. And it lasted a whole lot longer than him. Leonardo da Vinci painted amazing paintings. They lasted longer than him. A great artist. But God doesn't create things that outlast him. He outlasts his creations. And so human beings, yeah, we can create things that live longer than us. And that's, to some extent, the way if you think about it, that's the way we kind of define success as artists or as creators. Is this going to be my legacy? It will outlast me. And that we take pride in that. But God doesn't build things that outlast God. God outlasts his creations. So that's the difference. And that's what the rabbis derive from that. But we're going to get to my favorite part of this. Which is about the barchi nafshi, about the blessing of the soul. Bless my soul, God. But this does not satisfy Rav Shimi Bar Ukva, who said to Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, I meant to say to you as follows. Corresponding to whom? So they're not happy yet. They haven't gotten to a good enough lesson. And I think this is the really great lesson, right? I want to say to you as follows. Corresponding to whom did David say these 5 instances of barchi nafshi? Bless the Lord, O my soul. What does this really teach us? He said them about none other than the Holy. Blessed be he, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And corresponding to the soul. As the verse refers to the relationship between man's soul and God. The 5 instances of bless the Lord, O my soul, correspond to the 5 parallels between the soul in man's body and God's power in his world. And let me show you what they are. What are these, right? What are these? What are these connections between the soul and God in this world? This is beautiful. I think this is one of the more beautiful spiritual lessons we can learn from the Talmud. Just as the Holy One, blessed be He, fills the entire world, so too the soul fills our entire body. So God is everywhere in the world. There's no part of our body where there's no soul. Now I know, like you're saying, like, what does that even mean, right? Well, the rabbis would look at it this way. I don't know whether doctors will look at it this way, but again, I don't know that it's really wrong. I don't think anatomically incorrect to say. There's parts of our body that blood doesn't flow to. There's parts of our body that isn't filled with, as they would have looked at it, as oxygen or air. There's parts of our body that, quite frankly, certain other aspects of what animates us physically are, those pieces aren't there. The rabbis say that there's no part of our body that there isn't some of our soul in it. Our soul's in everything of our body. Like there's no part of our body that doesn't have soul. Every part of our body, which is really kind of amazing if you think about it, because they're saying that no part of our body, even the parts of our body that some people say in other traditions would say are evil or bad, Judaism says no, there's no part of your body that's not filled with soul energy. Every part of our body is filled with soul. Our bodies and souls are completely overlapping, right? So that's a beautiful tradition by itself. And the rabbis are telling us that's an example of what God is like in the world. There's no part of the universe that isn't filled with God. There's no part of it that's bereft or cut off from God, which is a really important idea because not every religion teaches that. And not only that, like for some religions, it's almost like necessary that there's a part of the universe that, God doesn't inhabit. That's where the sources of darkness are. And especially for Zoroastrians, which were a major alternative form of faith for the rabbis. Because remember, a lot of these rabbis are living in Babylonia, in the Iraq and Iran area, which at that time was not Muslim. It was Zoroastrian primarily. Also Roman influences and Roman gods. But the idea that one God is in one place and another God is another place, Judaism says, no, God, there's one God and that God is everywhere. That God's majesty and energy fills the whole world. And so just like our soul is filling up our whole body, there's no part of it that doesn't have soul in it. There's no part of the world that doesn't. There's no part of the universe that doesn't have. There's no part. That's one thing. Really important thing, both on our concept of God and our concept of a soul. The next one is, just as the Holy One, blessed be He, sees but is not seen, so too does the soul see but is not seen. So the rabbis say, look, we can't really see the soul, but if you think about it, it's like God. Because we don't see God. I mean, even Moses doesn't like really fully see God. But we know God is there. We just don't see God. And we know that God sees and our souls see, but we don't see them. And so, again, it's another similarity between our soul and God. Right? Everybody with us so far? Just as the Holy One sustains the entire world, so too does the soul sustain the entire body. So, God's energy is everywhere. It's what keeps the universe energized. It's the energy pulsating through the whole universe. And our soul is pulsating through our body. And so it's the energy which sustains it. And again, the Hebrew would be the word zan, zana. which is like the energy for it, the sustenance, the nourishment, the energy. We use the word hazanat hakol or birkat hamazon, the blessing over sustenance. And our soul sustains our body. Just as the Holy One, blessed be He, is pure, so too the soul is pure. Now that's an interesting idea. That our soul is pure. It's interesting. So what it's telling us is that our soul and God are both pure. Now, obviously, we're not always doing the right thing. So how could our soul be pure, but our body not pure? Parts of our body are not pure, or the decisions we make are not always holy, not always pure. To some extent, by the way, there's an interesting idea here, which is that when we see the world not operating in a good way, just like when we are not operating in a good way, in a healthy way, we'd say, yeah, but the underlying soul, right, isn't that good? Yes. But it doesn't mean that everything that we see in the operation of that comes out good. Now, we could say that that's because we, using our minds and making decisions, sometimes not good decisions, we don't do good things with our body and our soul. But it's this interesting idea that the world, the universe as we know it, the material world, when it doesn't go right, that doesn't mean that the underlying source behind it isn't pure. It just means that it's not moving the right way. Now, what's causing that to happen? Well, it seems like a lot of the time, at least in our world, it's us. So the interesting idea here, at least that's put out here, is that, look, just because the energy underneath it is good, is pure, if it's not harnessed in the right way, there's no guarantee that all the decisions or all the output is going to be pure. The energy behind it is pure. And the energy inside of us is pure. Our souls are pure. And the rabbis taught this. And we've been teaching it and believing that for a long time, which is also in contradiction to other faiths and other traditions, which teach us that our souls are corrupted, or that our souls are evil, or that our souls are bad. And Judaism doesn't teach that. Judaism doesn't teach us that our souls are bad. The soul is not bad. It's not evil. It's pure. And then, last one is just as the Holy One resides in a chamber within a chamber, right? The inner sanctum, the Kadosh Kadoshim, so too does the soul reside in a chamber within a chamber, in the innermost recesses of the body. So we just said that the soul is everywhere in the body. How could it be in a recess of the body? How can it be hidden within the body? So God manifests, or again, to some extent, we feel God's energy everywhere. But we know that God is in a place within the temple, originally in the Kadosh Kadoshim, in the Holy of Holies, where God's energy is there, but it's kind of in a recess of something. It's kind of hidden within another bigger thing. And the rabbi said that's interesting because we have that same thing going on with our soul, which is that even though it's everywhere in our body, it resides, its center, if you will, its energy is coming out within our bodies. It's coming in from a place so deep within our bodies that we can't even find it. Again, we can't see it. So how is that energy there? It's in a chamber within a chamber. So we can't access it. We're not allowed in it. We can't go to the soul source of our body. Only the Kohen Gadol could go in once a year into the Holy of Holies. Holy of Holies isn't supposed to be where anybody goes normally. God's energy is coming out of a place that's so highly concentrated that we can't really go into that. Most of us never can go into it. And again, with our own soul, we don't really do this. We don't go into that place. No one could argue that each one of us on Yom Kippur, to some extent, goes into that recess, into that place where our soul resides, that hidden place that we can't even see or put our finger on, but we sometimes feel it. On Yom Kippur, kind of make sure that that soul is clean, is found a good place. Just like the high priest had to clean out the Holy of Holies that day, maybe dust it for cobwebs and make sure there was no buildup in there because no one had gone in all year. But that's another piece of this mirror between our souls and God in this world. And of course, what is that? What is that? That which has these 5 characteristics of soul should come and praise God who has these 5 characteristics. Our souls are a reflection of God. And of course, that makes sense since our souls come from God. And so our soul is a microcosm and a representation of God in the universe. Our bodies represent, to some extent, the universe for God. It's a pretty heavy-duty thing that we just read because it really illustrates the Jewish view of the soul, and it also gives us an illustration of our view of God, which is that to some extent, again, our body is the mirror of the universe. And this is a really important idea in Kabbalistic teaching, which is that the body, to some extent, is the physical world, part of the world that we see, part of the world that things are happening in. But there's a undercurrent behind that. There is an energy behind that, which is the soul or is God. And it's not that the body isn't God. Of course, the body is also God. But there's an understanding that the body and our bodies and the universe, the material world, don't function exactly the way they're supposed to. And that's a really important idea in Kabbalah. That's a really important idea in Jewish mysticism, which is this stuff sometimes is out of whack. And to some extent, it's out of whack because especially in some forms of Kabbalah, the universe couldn't really stabilize God's energy. And that's what caused the Big Bang, if you will. What really caused all of the material world to kind of manifest the way it did is because the energy that God wanted to have stabilized couldn't be stable. And so it put the universe kind of in the material world out of whack and created pretty much everything that we see, which is both good and bad, but itself is to some extent a mistake, which is again, it's an idea that further develops within Kabbalah, but there's already this idea within, as we said, within the Talmud, this idea that the soul, which we don't even hear about really in the Bible that much, is here in the Talmud with quite an extensive and very poetic and beautiful reflection on our soul, right? So this is this is one of those texts that we derive a lot of we get a lot of power out of it. Does anyone want to comment or Does it have anything to say about this section? Yes, no? I do want to show you one other text, one of my favorite texts. It's actually a biblical text on this line in particular, or on this concept in particular, that kind of functions along this line, which is from Proverbs, which we'll read on Tuesdays after we'll get to it after we read Psalms. Is there's this very famous line in Proverbs, which is oftentimes used in kind of end of life times, is this line from Proverbs, which is Ner Adonai Nishmat Adam. Right? The life breath of man, right? It's translated in different ways. That's not my favorite translation of that, but because they reversed it. Ner Adonai is really what it says. The lamp of the Lord is the Nishmat Adam, which is the soul or the life breath of man. So the lamp of the Lord, or I would say the candle of God, the light, the ner, right? The candle of God, God's candle, if you will, is the neshama of humanity, a human being's candle. So God's light is our souls. Our energy is God's light. Our neshama. Now, this is a different word than nefesh. It's a slightly different word. And I don't want to get into necessarily the differences between the nefesh and the neshama, because there are people who say there is a difference between the nefesh and neshama. But for the purposes of what we're talking about right now, both of them have this idea that there is a soul, or there is a energy that is not the human body, which again, the rabbis are clearly differentiating between the goof. So a goof is a body. Sounds like a funny word, like goof, like a goofy, but that is the body. And the neshama is the spirit. Actually here, yeah, it says neshama. It doesn't use the word nefesh. The text says nefesh, barchoi nafshi. Here they're using nefesh and neshama interchangeably. So here, throughout, they used it. But again, later on, sometimes the rabbis will differentiate between a nefesh and a neshama. But yeah, the line in Proverbs is neshama. The line here in Talmud is neshama. And the original text, though, barchi nafshi, is nefesh. But Jesse, you look like you were going to say something. Oh, okay. Anybody have anything to say about that? Hello? No? Anybody? Okay. Okay, well, we'll move on then. Anybody, nobody has anything to say about the soul? You don't want to say anything? Mike, there's a difference of opinion over whether Mike has a soul. He claims he doesn't, but Mary says he does. He has a soul. He has the soul. He may not. Yeah, I was going to say, he may not have soul, but yes, he does. He has a soul.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, like, you know, if he had like rhythm and soul, like, that's what I was going to say. That's what I was kind of implying, that it's not like R&B soul, but let's not say that. Anyways, he does. He square dances, which is actually almost the opposite of soul, by the way. I just want to say, if we were going to describe the two styles of dancing, soul dancing versus square dancing, yes, it is the almost opposite. But that's not what we're saying. All right. When it goes, well, yes, it kind of did, because it did just tell us that David's soul, or David leaving his body, allows him to see God and say, Barchi nafshi, you know, that's one part of it. But there will be other more extensive discussions about what happens when we die. But this at least gives us an understanding that it makes sense that our soul continues when it is a reflection of God, right? To understand that, yeah, it fills our body just like God, just like these are all things that God does. So our soul is God. Our soul is, like the rabbis don't flat out say our soul is God there. It did not say that. But the implication was it is God. Now they didn't want to say that exactly because, that might strike some people as somewhat problematic in that it's going beyond, it's allowing for every person to be, to some extent, to have God in them. But it's not like I said, the line from Proverbs is even older. So it's not like, we could say, well, isn't that kind of what it's saying? But again, there is like a level of, well, if God isn't everything, then, like, then the problem is then you have to say, well, why are people continuing to do bad things? And the rabbis just, they kind of just almost pull the plug off that, even though you could make the argument that just like there's bad things that happens in, overall in the universe, it's because not everything the way it manifests out after the soul is within it doesn't make everything that the person, like the fact that we have a pure soul doesn't mean we do only good things. Clearly, that's not the case. So just because the universe is filled with God doesn't make it always right. And so the consequences of that are much bigger than the rabbis they don't want to deal with that. They really don't. They don't want to deal in the questions that Greek philosophy deals with. They're not interested in that. The rabbis will pull the plug off of those discussions almost as soon as they start them. Because there are philosophical discussions the rabbis say that they have. I shared with you one of them, which is that when the rabbis were discussing whether the universe was good or bad, the rabbis, and it's in the Talmud, I mean, we'll get to it. The rabbis literally say, yeah, maybe the universe isn't great. Maybe it went off the wall. Maybe God really allowed it to kind of go off the rails. And so maybe it's not good. Maybe the universe itself is not good. They make that kind of, they make that concession. But the rabbis then turn it and say, yeah, but this is the world that God gave us. So it's got to be okay. We have to deal with it. And so they were basically saying, okay, you can make that argument. Let's concede that argument. But we live here. And now we got to figure out how to make it work the best we can. So they open up those discussions and then kind of close the door on them and say, nah, not going to have that. We're not going to have that discussion. We're going to basically say, fine, Greeks and Romans, if you want to discuss about whether the nature of goodness or the nature of the universe is good or evil, you can have those discussions, but we're going to basically say, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because it is what it is. Doesn't mean that they're not going to have discussions about soul and about goodness and about everything else, but they're not going to, the biggest question, which is, okay, so is it good or bad? Well, whatever. We'll take that it's bad, but God clearly wants us to be in this world. So they kind of fall back on just a purely pragmatic answer without, taking it to a conclusion, a logical, a rational conclusion. So, help me out here. Is this part in the Ein Yaakov, or is this the part that they did not get into? Hezekiah?
Yeah, I was gonna ask that one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just first quick question about translation, because they're writing it, transliterating it.
Yeah.
They're not saying Isaiah, they're saying Yeshayahu. Why is it saying Chitzkiyahu?
Instead of Hezekiah? So Jesse's asking why. So the version of the Talmud, the translation that Jesse's reading from, is a more modern translation. This one, the Davidson Talmud, is based on a translation that was done 100 years ago, when, for the most part, Jews didn't just went along with the translation of the names that people had. So, like your translation is going to translate Moshe instead of Moses. I'm not going to use Moses. Like everyone uses Moses. Everybody.
Yeah, but that makes sense though, because like, isn't Hezekiah's name written Hezekiah in the scrolls, not Hizkiyahu?
No, it's Chizkiyahu. Yeah. No. So they went, instead of using the established words that are used in the Christian Bible, they didn't care. So they went and used the Hebrew names as much as possible. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Like every version of a Talmud or translation that comes out of, that's the Steinsalt's it's not Steinsaltz, it's the Art Scroll translations. Every year, or every year, but every time they translate a new book, they make it more and more Hebrew. They make it more and more, they care less and less, I should say, about whether you know the translation of this name by the standard name. So I noticed that they're doing more and more of the Hebrew names, partly because there's more and more people who are reading it that are Americans who live in Israel, who speak Hebrew a little bit more and are familiar with what the Hebrew actually says. But I think they're also just they're less concerned with keeping it standardized. They're not so concerned with that. So that's why. So they're actually stepping back now to talk about the Amidah and the way the prayers go from the Geulah prayer, the end of the Shema in its prayers, the Gaal Yisrael prayer, the end of the Shema, to the beginning of the Amidah. And so they talk about the connection between redemption, Geulah, and the Amidah, and this concept of prayer. And so here's an interesting little teaching about praying in general, I would say, and then also praying for certain things. So it says, Rav Hamnuna said, and this little discussion, hopefully we'll get to the end of it. I don't want to leave this one hanging, so I'm not going to go fast, but I'm going to go through this one here so you can see the whole text. Well, is there really an end to the text? Because as I just told you, the rabbis just went back and quoted Psalm 104 again in a very clever way. But so there's constantly references back to things we've read. But Rav Hanuna said, what is the meaning of that which is written praising the Holy One? Blessed be he, right? Who is like the wise man and who knows the interpretation of the matter? Which is from Ecclesiastes. Which Ecclesiastes is pretty philosophical. So who's like the Holy One, right? So who's like the wise man? Who's like the Holy One, they said. Blessed be he who knows how to effect compromise, peshara, between two righteous individuals. Who are the two righteous individuals that in not read pesher, interpretation, but peshara, compromise? There's an example here, the rabbis say, that God is the wise person, the wise, and don't read compromise, but don't read interpretation, but read the word compromise, the word pesher, which is usually understood to be interpretation. But here it would be understanding or compromise. The two individuals who were righteous were Hezekiah, king of Judea, right? And Isaiah, the prophet. They disagreed over which of them should visit the other. Hezekiah said, let Isaiah come to me, as that is what we find with regard to Elijah, the prophet who went to see Ahav, the king of Israel. As is stated, and Elijah went to appear before Ahav. So it's the job of the prophet to come to the king, not the other way around. This proves that it is the prophet who must seek out the king. And Isaiah said, let Hezekiah come to me, as that is what we find with regard to Jehoram ben Ahav, king of Israel, who went to Elisha the prophet. As it is stated, the king of Israel, Yehoshaphat, and the king of Edom went down to him, the king of Israel. Who was the king of Israel at the time. And Yehoshaphat was also a king, and also the king of Edom, all went to Elisha. So each of them had a biblical basis for saying the other one should come to see me. Prophet should come to see the king, and the kings go to see the prophet. So there's two biblical proof texts for either side, right? So what is the Holy One going to do? What did the Holy One, blessed be he, do to effect compromise between Hezekiah and Isaiah? He brought the suffering of illness upon Hezekiah and told Isaiah, go and visit the sick. Go to Isaiah, right? Go see him because he's sick. So God made Hezekiah sick, which we read about in the Bible, right? And God said, go see him. So God forced them to see each other in this way. Hezekiah had to get sick, which is not good. And Isaiah had to go see him. So they both had to make a compromise. And it says in the Bible, in those days, Hezekiah became deathly ill, and Isaiah ben Amoz, the prophet, came and said to him, thus said the Lord of hosts, set your house in order, for you will die and you will not live. So that's what Isaiah told him. And that's in the book of Isaiah, which again has this little narrative story about Isaiah going to see Hezekiah, who, by the way, according to tradition, I mean, they're related. According to tradition, Isaiah might have even, well, according to the rabbis, Isaiah might have even been, related directly to Hezekiah, and definitely should have seen him. But rabbis point out, though, that whole phrase, you will die and you will not live, that sounds redundant. Why does it say you will die and you will not live? This repetitions this means you will die in this world and you will not live. You'll have no share in the world to come. Well, that's pretty serious, right? Dying in this world's bad. Not living for eternity with God, that's terrible. So Hezekiah, that's some bad words. Hezekiah said to him, what is all of this? What transgression am I being punished? And Isaiah said to him, because you did not marry and engage in procreation. Holy moly! That seems crazy. Hezekiah apologized, right? He said, Isaiah, I had no children because I envisioned through divine inspiration that the children that emerge from me will not be good. They're going to be bad. I'm going to have bad children. And as we read about Hezekiah, he had bad children. They did not do good things. His son was bad. Manasseh was a bad king. Bad. Hezekiah means that he had seen that his children were destined to be evil. In fact, his son Manasseh sinned extensively, and he thought it preferable to have no children at all. Manasseh, according to the Bible, remember, offered up his son, Hezekiah's grandson, as a human sacrifice in the valley of Tophel in Gehinnom. It's where we get the word hell from. That Manasseh went out there and sacrificed a child, or at least made him pass through the fire, which we assume means he's not coming out of it. Manasseh was horrible. Child sacrifice king. Horrible. So Hezekiah said, I don't want to have a kid like that. I'm not going to have a kid. Now, the fact that he knew that means that he obviously consulted some sources, or, whatever. He knew. He had a vision. He had a dream. Right? So you don't want to have a kid. Makes sense. It's a good answer, right? Isaiah said to him, why do you involve yourself with the secrets of the Holy One, blessed be he? That which you have been commanded, the mitzvah of procreation, you are required to perform. And that which is acceptable in the eyes of the Holy One, blessed be he, let him perform, as he has so decided. Your job is to do what you're supposed to do, and God will do what God does. You don't have the ability to try to mess with what God's doing. You don't mess with God's plan. So, wow. Hezekiah had a good answer, but Isaiah had a better answer. Just your job is to do what you're supposed to do. You're king. Can't end the dynasty. Hezekiah said to Isaiah, now give me your daughter as my wife. Perhaps my merit and your merit will cause virtuous children to emerge from me. So he says to Isaiah, maybe if you give me your daughter, I won't have a bad kid. Isaiah said to him, the decree has already been decreed against you, and this judgment cannot be changed. So Isaiah says, don't get me involved in this. Don't get my daughter involved in this, right? It's already been planned. There's nothing you could do to stop it. You having a kid with my line is not going to fix it. Hezekiah said to him, son of Amoz, cease your prophecy and leave. As long as the prophet spoke as God's emissary, Hezekiah was obligated to listen to him. He was not, however, obligated to accept Isaiah's personal opinion that there was no possibility for mercy and healing. So what he said to him essentially is, the rabbis say, that Hezekiah said to Isaiah is, stop giving me your opinions. That's not what God told you. Get out of here. It's not your prophecy, right? So, and did God tell you it can't be changed? You know? I don't need your opinion here. Hezekiah continued, I have received a tradition from the house of my father's father, right? Going back from King David, the founding father of this dynasty. Even if a sharp sword rests upon a person's neck, he should not prevent himself from praying for mercy. One may still hold out hopes that his prayer will be answered, as was David himself when he saw the angel of destruction, but nonetheless prayed for mercy and his prayers were answered. So David taught the family, you never give up hope. Even if the sword is on your neck, you don't stop hoping that a miracle will happen. And so Hezekiah said, I don't believe you. I don't believe you, Isaiah. It's not over. And I'm going to pray for mercy. Because David, my ancestor, told me, my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather told me, told all of us, never stop praying for a miracle. Even when the sword is on your neck. Even when you're sitting there, maybe something will happen. With regard to the fact that no one should despair of God's mercy, the Gemara cites that it was also said that Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Eliezer, they both said, even if a sharp sword is resting upon a person's neck, he should not prevent himself from praying for mercy, as it is stated in Job. Though he slay me, I will trust in him. Even though God is about to take his life, he still prays for God's mercy. And that's the end of the page, but that's not the end of the text. Similarly, Rabbi Hanan said, even if the master of dreams in a true dream, an angel, right? Even not a prophet, but even if you get an angel that comes to you and tells a person that tomorrow he will die, he should not present himself from praying for mercy, as it is stated. For in the multitude of dreams and vanities, excuse me, there are many words, but fear God. Although the dream may seem real to him, that is not necessarily the case. Excuse me. And one must place his trust in God. Now that's an amazing idea, which is that even if an angel tells you you're going to die, don't believe it. And you might be able to change it. Don't be afraid that you're going to die, even if they tell you that in a dream. Yep. So, for those who have had a dream that they were going to die or were sure they were going to die and didn't die, The rabbi said that that's very much the case. Having heard Isaiah's harsh prophecy, it says, Hezekiah turned his face toward the wall and prayed to the Lord. That's what it says, right? You read in, the next verse. So all of this is not in the text. We read this in Isaiah not that long ago. And this whole conversation is not there. I mean, part of it's there, but the other part of it's not there. The midrash part here is not there. But the rabbis said, when it says that he prayed towards the wall, the kir, in Hebrew, the word for wall is kir. What is meant by the word wall? What does kir mean here in this context? Why did Hezekiah turn his face to a wall? Now, it doesn't seem like a normal thing, right? That someone prays towards a wall. Now, of course, we have the Western Wall. We have the Wailing Wall. Couldn't we say that that's why he turned to a wall? No. That's not what the king would have done normally. Praying to a wall is a strange idea, but it also, again, the rabbis are not reading it literally wall. Reish Lakish, right? Shimon ben Lakish said, Reish Lakish said, this symbolically alludes to the fact that Hezekiah prayed to God from the chambers, the kirot of his heart. As it is stated, my anguish, I am in pain. The chambers of my heart moans within me. Now that line is from another prophet. It's from Jeremiah. But in Jeremiah, it says, kirot libo. Our heart has chambers, has walls, has sections. Now, they knew what the heart looked like. They knew the heart had chambers. They understood that. They, of course, understood that the chambers of the heart reflected also chambers or pieces of our spiritual heart, our heart where we pray from. And so his prayer actually comes from an interior part of his soul, the deepest part of his soul. And again, coming back to what we just were talking about, the fact that our soul has kind of a hidden place. He turned inside. He turned inwards. He didn't really look at a wall. He brought it inside of himself. He brought his prayer into his own deepest part of his soul. Rabbi Levi said, Hezekiah intended to evoke matters relating to a wall. And he said before God, Master of the universe, and if the woman from Shinum who made only a single small wall in the roof for the prophet Elisha, and you revived her son, all the more so should you bring life to the descendant of my father's father, King Solomon, who entered the entire temple sanctuary, who covered the entire temple sanctuary with silver and gold. In his prayer, Hezekiah said, please, Lord, remember that I walked before you in truth with a complete heart, and what was good in your eyes I did. And Hezekiah wept sore. So here again is a reflection of the word heart, but also here they basically use the word kir, a wall, literally. In the story of Elisha, which we also had the references from before, the prophet Elisha, who revives a woman's son who's dead, brings him back to life. She's a poor woman who provided Elisha a home, right? Elisha gets to stay in the home. It's a place where he gets to kind of like his Airbnb. He gets to stay with in this woman's house. It's a very simple existence. And remember, her son died, and Elisha brought that son back to life. But that was only for the sake of this little room that he made for Elisha. Think about what my ancestor Solomon did. God, he built you this big temple. For the sake of my family, for the sake of my ancestor Solomon, who made this beautiful place, not just one wall, not a little room for Elisha, but for you, God, we made this whole temple. Won't you save me? Now, he also says, I've tried to do the right thing. I walked before you in truth and with a complete heart, and I tried to do what was right. And Hezekiah, of course, really prays from his soul. But he also does bring up the walls, if you will, the walls of the temple, and says, for the walls, what am I talking about? Yeah, not the Wailing Wall, because the Wailing Wall was part of the last temple, the third temple or the second temple, the temple the Romans destroyed. This was he's saying the walls of the first temple, the temple that my ancestor Solomon brought to you, God. It was still standing, right? And so this is 200 years before, 150 years before the Babylonian destruction. So he says, look at these walls, God. Save me for those walls. So what did Hezekiah do that was so good? Gemara asks, to what specific action was he referring when he said, and what was good in your sight? I did. And now we're going to see what Hezekiah did. And this is what we're going to finish with today. Different opinions of what Hezekiah did, where he can say to God, what I did because it was, I did it for you. So Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav that he juxtaposed redemption and prayer, right? At sunrise instead of sleeping late, as was with the custom of most kings. So what did he do? He actually prayed the way you're supposed to pray. And he did it first thing in the morning. He didn't sleep late like most kings did. He woke up in the morning and prayed the Shema and the Amidah, and he did what was right. He prayed to you, God. That's one possibility. Rabbi Levi said he suppressed the book of remedies upon which everyone relied. Now, what is this about? Well, I'll show you. He withheld. He made people pray. Instead of them finding sources in science, he made them pray. So instead of, I wouldn't say they were saying it was magic, but using science, let them pray instead. So that was something he did. The sages taught King Hezekiah performed 6 innovative actions. With regards to 3, the sages agreed with him. And with regards to 3, they did not agree with him. So he did some really bold things. Sometimes the sages say they're good, and sometimes they're not good. With regards to the 3 actions the sages agreed with him, he suppressed the book of remedies, and they agreed with him. He ground the copper snake through which miracles were performed for Israel, destroying it because it had been used for idol worship. That's one of the things we read Hezekiah did. He destroyed the Nehushtan. Remember the thing that Moses had made to cure people of snake bites? Now, the whole reason, by the way, that we even have that book of remedies is because Hezekiah seems to be connected to remedies somehow. We don't know what the book of remedies is. It's the first time we've ever heard the book of remedies, but maybe it was part of that Nehushtan. What was that gold copper snake? It's kind of like the caduceus. It's kind of like the symbol of Asclepius, the symbol of healing. So maybe Hezekiah was a little bit of a connected with the sources of medicine. So he destroyed the stuff that we weren't supposed to be doing, which again included looking up at a snake and being healed by it. And here's the last thing that he did that they agreed with. He dragged the bones of his evil father, King Ahaz, on a bed of ropes, meaning he did not accord his father a funeral fit for a king. And with that, they agreed with him. Yeah, we know Ahaz was not a good king. And whatever he did with his father's burial, he didn't elevate him in a way that would, again, it's not that he didn't bury him, but he didn't bury him with the full tradition fit for a king because he was a bad king. He was a bad guy. He was a bad dude, Ahaz. So what's interesting about Hezekiah is his dad wasn't a good guy and his son wasn't a good guy. We've talked about this before. Same thing with some extent, again, with King Josiah. We know that King has a bad dad, but a good, he has a good reign, but his son then screws up. We have that a lot, which is where the rabbis actually, we already read in one place already in the Talmud that we derive that, again, we talked about why do some people have a good life and some people have a bad life if they have done good things, and why do bad people have a good life? Sometimes because their parents were so good that they catch a break here in this world. And sometimes a good person doesn't catch a break because their parents weren't good in this world. So the rabbis already gave us this idea that the kings were like that. But they don't think he's always completely good. Because here they see 3 innovations he did, and they did not think that it was good. He stopped up the waters of the Gihon, the pool of Siloam, diverting its water into the city by means of a tunnel. That's the famous tunnel of Hezekiah, which we've discovered. We archaeologically uncovered the tunnel of Hezekiah, and you can go visit it in Jerusalem and walk through the tunnel of Hezekiah. We've done it. It's one of the things in the Bible that has been proven to exist, and it's one of the oldest things in the Bible that's proven to exist. The waters of the Gihon, that underground spring that he diverted into the city of Jerusalem so that in case it got ever laid siege to, they'd have water. They didn't like that. They didn't like the idea of diverting water from someplace it wasn't supposed to be, even though it was going to Jerusalem. But they had a little bit of a problem with that, the rabbis, or at least the people, it says, of his generation. He cut off the doors of the sanctuary and sent them to the king of Assyria. They didn't like that at all, right? Why did he do it? Because remember, Hezekiah was essentially kept hostage. They laid siege to Jerusalem, the Assyrians, and he bought some time by sending them money. The rabbi said, no, he should never have done that. That was too much. So cutting off the doors of the Beit HaMikdash and giving it to the Assyrian kings should never have done that. And then the last thing is that we don't have any, some of these we know they happened. Some of these we don't know that they happened. This one we don't know that it happened. He intercalated Nisan in Nisan, creating a leap year by adding an extra month during the month of Nisan. That intercalation must only be performed before the end of Adar. You're not allowed to add another Nisan. You can only do it with Adar.
We were already adding second Adar?
No. There's no, look, the line says, he told people to come up to keep Passover, in Jerusalem. It's called Pesach Sheni. The rabbis just basically said that Pesach Sheni was his extra Nisan. It's a stretch, but they basically said this is an extra Nisan. It's not what it is. They know it's not, but they're basically saying he didn't have the authority to do that. So those are the 3 things that they say he did. Again, 2 of them we know about. This one isn't really what's mentioned. This one, the Book of Remedies, isn't mentioned copper snake is, and I'm not sure the line. Yeah. Here when it says his body was not brought to the tombs of the kings of Israel, that's all it says. Achaz slept with his father and he was buried in the city. His body was not brought to the tombs of the kings of Israel. It basically says, again, he did not, that I think is even clearer, that he did not give his father a funeral fit for a king. But again, they actually thought that that was appropriate because his father was not a good guy. So again, at the end of the day, they're saying that Hezekiah did some stuff that he wasn't supposed to do. Oh, and here's the explanation, by the way. The discussion about the intercalation, adding that extra month. How did they get to that? With regard to this intercalation of Nisan, the Gemara asks, did Hezekiah not accept the halakha? The month will be for you the first of the months. It shall be for you the first of the months, right? From Exodus. By inference, this first month is Nisan and no other month is Nisan. How could Hezekiah even add an additional Nisan in violation of Torah law? The Gemara answers that the scenario was different. Rather, Hezekiah erred with regard to the halakhic opinion ascribed in later traditions and generations to Shmuel. And Shmuel said, one may not intercalate the year on the 30th day of Adar, since it is fit to establish it as a new moon of Nisan. So again, basically, again, on the 30th day of each month, those who witnessed the new moon would come and testify before the court, which was based on their testimony. Again, based on the testimony, would declare that the day, the first day of the next month. Therefore, one may not declare a leap year on the 30th day of Adar, as it could potentially become the first day of Nisan. Therefore, the sages of Hezekiah's generation did not agree with his decision to intercalate the year on the 30th of Nisan. Hezekiah held that we do not say, since the day is fit to establish it as new moon, is reason enough to refrain from intercalation. Again, what is that? Basically, he decided what day the new month would be. And they said he didn't have the authority to do that. Again, it's a big stretch. They know that that's a knock on him, but whatever. It doesn't even say that he did that. Stemming from the analysis of Hezekiah's prayer, Rabbi Yochanan, and we're going to just finish with this. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra, anyone who bases his prayer or request upon his own merit, when God answers his prayer, it is based upon the merit of others. And anyone who modestly bases his prayer or request upon the merit of others, when God answers his prayer, it is based upon his own merit. How do we really pray? How should we really pray? We should really pray based on not our own merit, but on the merit of those who came before. What's the example? When Moses prayed to God after the incident of the golden calf, he based his request upon the merit of others, as it is stated, remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, or Jacob, your servants, to whom you swore upon yourself and told them again. This is the line. I will increase your descendants like the stars in the heavens. Right? He reminds God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yet when this story is related, God's forgiveness of Israel is based upon Moses' own merit, as it is stated, and he would destroy them had Moses, his chosen, not stood before him in the breach to turn back his destructive fury, lest he would destroy them. What does it tell us? Moses, when he prayed for the people, didn't say, do it for me. He said, do it for our ancestors. But when the Psalms tells the story, it doesn't say God did it for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It said Moses stopped it. Moses stopped our punishment at Mount Sinai. So what it tells us is that if we say to God, do it for me, we won't get credit for it. But if we say it on behalf of, do it for other people, God, we will get credit for it. Well, kind of tells us that people want to know that God did something based on our merit, but we really shouldn't say it. We shouldn't say, God, please do this miracle for me. We should say, do it for somebody else. And wait, let's just read this last part. I don't know if we can get through this. Yeah. No, this is a good place for us to end because the next part gets into a discussion about well, actually, let's just read this one paragraph. Well, the problem is, okay, we'll read this last paragraph because the next part really gets into the discussion back about the Elisha's prayer to revive that child. Hezekiah, however, based his request upon his own merit, as it is written, please remember that I walked before you. When God answered his prayers, it was based upon the merit of others, with no mention made of Hezekiah's own merit, as it is stated, and I will protect this city to save it for my sake and for the sake of David, my servant. So when God actually saves Hezekiah, because at least let's get to that part, Hezekiah survived. He did not die, as Isaiah said he would. He survived. But when he survives and survives of his illness, God said, I did it for my sake and for the sake of David, right? Your ancestor, right? My servant. And that is what Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said. As Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said, what is the meaning of that which is written? Behold, for my peace I had great bitterness. But you, God, have in love to my soul delivered it from the pit of corruption, for you have thrown all my sins behind your back. That is from Isaiah. This verse teaches us that even when the Holy One, blessed be he, sent him in peace and told him that he would never recover from his illness, it was bitter for him because God did not take this merit into consideration. And so what did God do? God changed his mind. God said, I'm not going to let Hezekiah die. So God didn't want to do it. God actually changed his mind. And so even though he shouldn't have asked for God to do it in his merit, he did change it. And now we're going to get, next week, we'll get back into this discussion of the boy that was saved from next week we are in person and online. And then that will be next week. God willing. Though I'm starting to feel sick right now. I literally, in the last hour, I cannot stop sneezing. Stop saying COVID. Why did you go right to COVID? Why did you go right to COVID?
No.
All I know is I'm going to pray to God for my health, but not for my own sake. For the sake of those who came before me. No, thankfully, I haven't been sick in a long time, so I don't want to get sick now. My family just got back from England and from, they just got back. I just picked them up. I picked them up from the airport today, which I did because I'm a dutiful husband. Should not have gone down there. It's probably why I'm sick now. Never should have gone to that dirty, dirty airport. No. Anyways, it was a long day. It was a long day. It was a long day. It was a long one. All right, everybody. Thanks for being here and stay healthy. I'm going to go home and go to sleep. And
Feel
hopefully
better
not be
soon.
sick. Thank you, Joyce.
Yes,
You feel
get
better
well
too.
soon.
I'll talk to you later. I'll see you next week. We'll see you
Goodbye.
on Tuesday or Wednesday, hopefully both. Bye, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.